Hi, everyone. Welcome again. We are going to get started now. You've got Chris Ciunci, Managing Partner at Tribal Vision here, along with my colleague, George Copley. We are going to be leading our webinar today titled Building Your 2020 Digital Marketing Playbook. We're always going to make sure we're mindful of your time. So this is going to be going on for an hour. We're going to make sure wherever we're at 12:50, we're going to be stopping. Even if we don't get through the full webinar presentation, just know that sometime this afternoon, anyone in attendance is going to be getting the presentation. So even if we don't finish everything, because hopefully this is chock full of great information, just know you will be receiving the deck sometime at the end of the day here today, okay? So with that, I just wanted to, again, get started here. Know that we've got a lot of good things to get through. We're thinking at first, we just want to get started with talking through your key marketing asset, your website, and that's then going to flow through to a lot of your other tactics that we think are really important for 2020. So let's first get started with your workhorse, which is your website. Now, know that we're not going to be talking about the basics of basics here with your website, because we want to make sure we're adding value. So that's the goal here for this webinar. Can you come away with 4 or 5, hopefully even more nuggets that you can take with you back to your office? So we're not just going to go over the basics of website. We're hoping to add something new here for you. That being said, just first wanted to start with this first slide here. Know that all of this presentation is about digital marketing today. Why? Because nowadays, most buyers, especially B2B, which is what this presentation is geared to, B2B marketing, most buyers are now online. They're not just going to look at print ads and going to trade shows. While that still is somewhat relevant, it's decreasing in relevance. So no, we're going to be speaking 100% today on digital marketing and social media marketing here, okay? So as a result, we're going to first start with a little intro here. We're going to be talking to your website, like I said. There's many other assets, of course, that we can be talking to, but we're going to first start with website, which then will flow into search engine optimization, LinkedIn advertising, account-based marketing, and also geofencing. I don't know if many of you have done geofencing or not, but we're certainly excited to talk about that. So let's dive right in. We're going to be talking to your most prominent asset first, which is your website. I want to make it clear on this slide that while website is your workhorse online, there certainly are other assets that you should be thinking about. We're not going to be talking about them in this webinar, but you should be thinking about your email marketing templates, your social media graphics, and the skinning of your social media. You should be thinking about your pitch decks, anything that you can think of from an asset perspective. You really have to make sure that you're focusing on here. But for the purpose of this webinar, we're just going to be talking about the workhorse digital asset, which is your website. 3 pet peeves of ours when we're working with our clients is oftentimes websites that we start with don't have these 3 key tenets that we think are really important from a design and user experience perspective. So number 1, this might sound basic, but make sure that your website is clean and it's clutter-free. Instead of writing paragraphs, you should be thinking instead about white space. You should be thinking about video. You should be thinking about less is more oftentimes with how you're presenting yourself on your website. Lots of companies have a lot to say, as does Tribal Vision, but you've got to do it in a very digestible way. If you were to look at the Tribal Vision site, using us as your example, you'll see that you could spend hours on our website, but it's still very clutter-free. It's right. There's not just paragraphs upon paragraphs. It's very digestible and easy to navigate. Think of Apple, think of white space. White space is good. And oftentimes companies that we first start working with, there's a lot of clean and white space that needs to happen. Number 2, key point here from a design and user experience with your websites, you've got to make sure that you are humanizing the experience. That's where video can come into play. Think video over words, right? Think conversations over forms. Nowadays, especially with the younger millennial demographic, they are not just looking at just your attributes of your product or service. They actually do want to understand your company story. They want to understand your why. There needs to be an emotional component to your website. Even being a B2B company, you might say, well, I'm just selling into an engineer, I'm selling into an architect. It's still very important as much as you can to humanize, and that will help differentiate you so you're not just competing on price. Same thing goes for benefits versus features. Again, a lot of companies that we work with, they're just talking about features and they're not talking about pain points of their clients that they need to be solving. So take a step back with your website, make sure that you understand the personas, the buyer personas that are actually visiting your website, and make sure then you are messaging each of them in very specific ways, trying to figure out really what makes them tick and what makes them happy if they're going to be working with you, not just about spec sheets and what your attributes are. Okay, so high level, those are 3 key points about the design of your website, very important. Next, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts a little bit with some nuggets here for you to be thinking about optimizing your site. So I'll let George, you want to take this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, everyone. George Copley here, Business Development Manager at Tribal Vision. Very happy to be here speaking with Chris. And I see a lot of names here that I recognize. So glad everyone took the time to attend today. To talk a bit more about site speed optimization, right? I have a stat here that says every second it takes for your website to load, you're losing on average like a 7% conversion rate potentially. So it's more important than ever, whether you be on desktop, mobile, or tablet, that your site is loading quickly. We've all had that frustration when we've been waiting, at the subway stop, in your home, in the office, waiting for something to load, and you just click out because you can't be bothered and you go to a competitor. So now more than ever, site speed is so important because we're losing our patience, right? It's just a trend. Right away, some things I can recommend are you can go on sites like Google Speed Test or Pingdom, they're called, and you can put your URL in there and it'll run a quick scan of the site and it'll tell you how long it takes for your website to load, and you can choose by geographic area. So if you have a lot of clients on the East Coast, you can set that so that you can see on the East Coast specifically how quickly or slowly it runs. And then secondly, it'll tell you how to fix it. It'll tell you what you can do. It could be some quick wins or it could be some more technical wins that you could do to improve your site speed. And oftentimes when we run this by clients, there are a couple things right away we get done for them just to improve it by a couple seconds or milliseconds. Some of the things, for example, that we see are optimizing image size. When you take a picture on your camera and you upload it to your computer, or even if you buy stock imagery, if you don't download that stock imagery at an optimal size, it'll slow down the site because the computer and the server have to load that image. And you can oftentimes compress it by up to 70% to add seconds off of your load speed. So we have a couple tools there on the right, and a couple of them are Image Optim, JPEG Mini, Kraken. Those are all places you can go, websites you can go to online to upload imagery and click condense or compress, and it will do that for you. If you already have, some of you might be in the position where you have WordPress, for example, as a content management system for your website. If you already have all your pictures up there, you might say, well, George, that's going to take forever to do. There are plugins. An example is one called Smush, where you can download the plugin on WordPress and you can then you can tell it to compress all of your imagery after that. So it'll do it all at once for you, which you will see immediate results for. To quickly go through the rest, using a CDN or a content delivery network, we're getting a bit more technical here where you might want to start utilizing your developer or outsourcing for that. But ultimately, what that does is it's a server that will cache all the information on your site and save it for people basically around the country or the globe if you invest in that. And lastly, loading JavaScript in the footer. Once again, this is the most technical of the 3, so it's definitely somewhere you should lean on a specialist unless you feel comfortable doing it yourself. But oftentimes there's too many large JavaScript files in the header or the footer, and it can delay the loading of the rest of the page.
Great. Okay, so next here, let's talk about mobile optimization. So just know that this is, if there's any takeaway regarding website, other than site speed that we mentioned, is you've just got to make sure that you're mobile friendly. And there's always different layers on that in terms of just how mobile friendly a company is. Oftentimes you work with a company and they say they're mobile friendly, but there may be in the 4th inning, but there's many more innings to go. But nowadays with Google especially, If your website's not showing up properly on someone's mobile phone, where, as you can see here in our slide, 55% of B2B search queries are going through that phone, you will be penalized by Google. It'll be very much more difficult for you to be appearing on the first page of Google for any organic results if your website isn't optimized for that phone. And by the way, that's only going to continue to grow. Right? Just next year, 70% of searches are going to be done by phone versus a desktop. Especially with the millennial generation. All right, I have a 15-year-old son. Everything is done on his phone at this point. So again, in terms of go-to tools, just know that you can, again, we want this to be practical for you. So there's Google's mobile friendly test that you can be putting in your domain, your URL, and that will be able to give you a score on just how mobile friendly your website is. And again, back to what George was saying about finding potentially a developer or a coder, you might need to do that, right? Because it's great. You run this through your mobile friendly test. It shows that you have a D or a C. All right. Then what do you do about that? Well, then, with Google, it'll tell you what you do need to do to make this more mobile friendly. You can find that developer or that coder and then make sure that that's being fixed.
And guys, George jumping in here, there's two other tidbits I want to add here. You can go and see how much of your website traffic is coming from a mobile device. If you log into Google Analytics, which is a free tool all of you should have integrated with your website, you can go on there and filter it by how many people are looking from a mobile device, a tablet, or a desktop. Additionally, and we're going to dive into this more, this will affect your SEO, and that's one of the most important marketing tactics that's going around right now. And for those of you, we'll talk about it later, but it's good to keep in mind that mobile friendliness, if you don't have a mobile friendly site, it's going to hurt your SEO.
Absolutely. Okay, another cool tool you should be knowing about if you don't already for your website, sort of future here in marketing. There's a company, there's many, but one that we're focusing on here is Drift. They've coined the term recently, quote unquote, conversational marketing. How can you be starting a conversation through your website versus it just acting like a brochure? So we're just using Tribal Vision's website as a screenshot example here, but you can see, right, there's a colleague at Tribal Vision, Greg Wilkes. You'll see that even if you go to the tribalvision.com website, you're going to see him appear in a very non-intrusive way, by the way. So there's some business owners or marketing execs that we work with where they're like, no, we don't want to be too aggressive with this. We want someone to feel like they're able to browse. This gives you that option while you're still able to click on this if you'd like and start a conversation. And just using, again, Tribal Vision as a real life example from Drift's, and this is a free tool that we're showing you right here, from Drift's conversational marketing bot. Greg is typically entering into, at least, 5 to 10 conversations that we wouldn't have already had on a weekly basis. And some of those have turned into actual leads in business for Tribal Vision. So as much as you can create engagement, like I talked about before on your website, stay away from content, right? Meaning just written content, focus on engagement. This is a great tool to help you get there. Okay, just know also, I said it's a free tool. There's also, again, that's how Drift gets their foot in the door. From there, there's also, paid versions. We actually have the paid version of $50 a month, right? We're not breaking the bank here, where there's just a knowledge base that can be much more targeted per page of your website if you're interested in that. And by the way, there's also, in addition to Drift, right, there's HubSpot has their own tool. There are other tools that are out there right now, but this is sort of the hot new thing that's going on out there that's helping sales teams build conversations.
Yeah, and just to jump in to talk a little bit more about what you get with that $50 versus the free. The free is literally a live chat. You have somebody on your end answering queries, and you can set up an automation where once the business day is over, it says something like this: I'm currently away from my computer, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. With the $50 bot, you get that exactly. You get an automation where if you don't have the time, or somebody at your organization doesn't have the time to sit behind a computer and directly answer questions, you can put them through qualifying yes or no or multiple choice questions. And once the bot realizes that they're really looking for a sales rep or an IT rep or whoever it may be, it'll get them in touch with that person. So it does a lot of the legwork for you.
Yeah, that's great. In addition, another cool tool for you guys to be knowing about, if you don't already, we have some clients on the call, so they might already know about this, is I I know that you already, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, about Google Analytics for your website, but what Google Analytics doesn't give you, this type of reverse IP tool like Visual Visitor does, you can actually know the company that is on your website from that day or the day before. I typically run a daily report so that I can see, okay, what companies, and sometimes even individuals of companies, were on my website today or yesterday or last week. If you just want to run it on a weekly basis, it'll provide you with that information. And this is just a dashboard, their reporting dashboard that you can be using. It's not perfect, so I want to be very clear. Get excited, but not too excited, just because I would say, because again, Tribal Vision uses this tool, about 1/3 of the visitors on your site we found we can actually identify back to a company name. Now, if someone's filled out a form on your website previously, then you're going to be able to capture them 100% of the time. Problem is, most companies don't fill out a form, or visitors fill out a form when they're on your website. But still, even if you get a 33% hit rate of who was on your site, that's very valuable from a sales perspective, right? So imagine, again, Tribal Vision, we've been speaking to a company, all of a sudden they decided not to work with us. That was 4 months ago. Now we see they're back on our website. We can see how long they've been on our website. It's a great opportunity for us to re-engage with that company. Or vice versa, right? We could have a company that ultimately we've never done business with before, but it could be a huge opportunity that we see as sniffing around our website. We can talk to sales to figure out how we want to approach that company. In terms of pricing, right, the platform starts at $59 a month. We've been able to negotiate it down even further to about $40 a month. Don't tell them we told you that, but there's probably a little wiggle room there as well. And just know this is not the only tool again, right? This has become a bit commoditized, so you can look at other tools as well. One is called Lead Lander, and there are many others, but great tool for you to have a little bit more intelligence about what's going on with your website. Okay. All right, so we're still under website, but we thought, why don't we throw in some SEO tips and tricks and tools here, since SEO, of course, is bolted onto your website. Again, a quick primer for any beginners on the call. SEO stands for search engine optimization. It's really, what it really enables you to do is, if you do it right, you can be organically, meaning on your own without paying for it, you can be appearing on the first page of Google. Just as a quick reminder, the first 4 placements on the top page of Google are now reserved for paid advertising. That's how Google makes their billions. But oftentimes in non-competitive B2B spaces, you won't even see those 4. You might just see 1 or 2 ads up top. And then as you see with this slide, the box that we're highlighting, that border, the red border, that is organic. That's search engine optimized, right? Rankings there. So the goal is, you've built this website, you've added some tools. The next question, of course, is, are you getting traffic to that website? And that's what these next few slides here are talking to. Okay, so that's a little bit about search engine optimization. Just know a starting point for you will be, okay, well, how do I even begin to know if my website is optimized for search or not? You can use tools that are out there. One, as you're seeing on the right-hand side of the slide, called Site Checker, allows you to do a complete audit of your website, page by page, for you to see where you're ranking from an SEO perspective. And it won't just tell you, okay, you're not ranking well, you have a C-. Well, it'll also tell you, they'll provide you with optimization suggestions so that you can actually go about, oftentimes with that coder that we've talked about, or a marketing firm, you can then go about making those changes. Okay, so really valuable before you just dig into SEO and start figuring out, what you can be doing with keywords. You first should be looking to your own website and seeing what your grade is of your website in each page before you do anything else.
And just a couple things that they're going to judge you on. I mean, the big thing here, guys, is content. You want to make sure that you have valuable, unique content. Secondly, like we talked about earlier, you want to make sure the site loads quickly and is mobile friendly. And lastly, Google and other search engines, we should say, like Bing, for example, or Yahoo, are going to look, and they are going to see, how are people interacting with the website? Are they going on the site and then leaving immediately, otherwise known as a bounce rate? Or are they staying around? Are they clicking? Are they clearly engaging with the content? Once again, the importance of having valuable and unique content.
Great. So once you've then done that audit of your website, the next step then is you then have to be thinking about the right keywords for you to be optimizing your site with, right? So again, very easy for us to use Tribal Vision as the example. When we first built the Tribal Vision website, we came up with about 12 to 15 keywords that we wanted to make sure that Google found us for and that we were found relevant for us to be able to rank on the first page of Google for. So an example, if you were to Google outsourced marketing firms, you'll most likely find Tribal Vision on that first page, right? That was one of the most important keywords that we wanted to rank very highly for. We have about 15 others that we want to make sure we're on the first page organically for, because we feel like there's a lot of business within those 15 keywords, right? Because if someone's looking for an outsourced marketing firm, they find us on Google, there's a good chance then that we could be working together and monetizing that. So for your own business, you have to start thinking about what are those key 12 to 15 keywords. Don't think it's going to be 1,000 keywords. You can't optimize your website for 1,000 keywords. You start with a tight-knit basket of, like I said, about 15. And from there, you've got to figure out, okay, what are those words? And that really is determined by 3 factors, right? Search volume, relevance, and competition, right? Because you don't want to be searching or being found for words where there's no search volume, right? So if outsourced marketing firm, I could brag that we're #1 in the country for that word, but if there's no volume of people searching for that word every day, who cares, right? It's a very hollow brag. But if there's a ton of monthly searches for that, then that's where things get exciting. So you first have to know what that search volume is, which we'll get into with our tool in a moment. And from there, you've got to make sure that there is relevance of that term to what you can actually offer. And then lastly, you've got to think about what the competitive landscape looks like for that word. Because if, I'll use, again, Tribal Vision as the example, if we decided marketing firm was a word that we wanted to rank on the first page of Google for, because my God, the volume is huge for marketing firm. But then all of a sudden we took a look at the competitive landscape for that word, and we're up against, publicly traded companies who are also ranking and trying to rank for that word. There's a very good chance we're not going to be on the first page given who we're up against. So you've got to have the right balance between volume and your ability to actually find yourself on that first page from a competitive standpoint. So you've got to be balancing, really both from a barbell type of approach. In terms of the tool that you can start your process with, right? There's a Google Keyword Planner. It's a free tool, right? Where it'll allow you to see the keyword volume, the monthly estimated searches for the keywords that you've initially selected. Okay, so that'll at least give you, this is what the volume looks like. And then from there, you can then start taking a look at what the competitive threat looks like in your space as well. Okay, so that's the way you've got to be, or at least the process you should be going through to be thinking through your keyword selection. Okay, now we're just going to go over basics. So I'm going to do this very quickly, but just know that there's on-page, what's called on-page search engine optimization, and off-page. We're just going to focus on on-page for 2 slides, but just know that, remember that audit I told you that you should be doing? That audit will be able to tell you, okay, you know what, the title tag of each of your pages isn't even filled out properly, or you're lacking with meta descriptions, or that content that George talked about that was so important is lacking. This is where you've got to make sure, where you have to make sure for each of the pages on your website, you have a title tag, you have a meta description, and the content in some way parallels the title tags and meta descriptions. Okay, so just know that that's the basic of SEO, but oftentimes companies we work with, they don't have those basics down yet, and they're losing traffic because of it. Okay, so again, we've talked a little bit about title tags and meta descriptions. I'll just give you one nugget. If you're still thinking I'm vague on meta descriptions, just put in Google any search word you want here in Google, and whatever that ad copy is on Google, that comes up organically, that's your meta description. So oftentimes companies don't even think about what that ad copy looks like, or they haven't spent time on writing it and rewriting it so that you're clicked on. But it's one thing to appear highly on Google, but if you're not clicked on yourself for that word, then who cares again? So make sure you're spending a little bit of time on your meta descriptions so that you should be thinking of it as ad copy. Okay. George, you want to talk about some tools here as well that we can just give some practical nuggets that they can be looking into?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting at the top left, SpyFu, and the one below it, Sem Rush, those are our go-to recommendations for everything SEO, and oftentimes there are PPC or paid search functionalities. But to stay in the realm of SEO, SpyFu, the packages start around $39 a month, and it's a great way to either look at your own SEO standing or your competitors. Once again, you can, I believe there's a free trial you can do, so I would check it out online, spyfu.com. But you can go in and you could type in a competitor's domain, and you can see everything in terms of their keywords they're ranking for. You can see their traffic, how many people are going to the website because of search engines. You can see how much they're spending on things like PPC and SEO. Same with Sem Rush below. That's a more advanced tool. Most of our specialist partners use this over SpyFu. That starts around $99 a month. But a great tidbit is that for free, you can look up 10 different companies a day. So if you have a list of 10 competitors, I'd recommend you go there after the webinar, put it in Sem Rush, download the free reports, and start analyzing. Take a look once again at their organic search, their marketing efforts, what keywords they're doing, different traffic trends, and so forth. We talked about Site Checker Pro. That's a great place to go and put your own domain in and get an analysis of how your SEO is doing. We talked about Keyword Planner. Yoast is once again a WordPress plugin. So for all of you who have websites on WordPress, I imagine there might be other content management system versions, but just to talk about WordPress, you can download that, and in the actual plugin, you'll be able to manually add the title tags and meta descriptions, which Chris was just talking about, on your own. You don't need a specialist to do it. So that is a great tool. Lastly, the Moz Toolbar is a Chrome extension where you can download it and you could go to one of your competitors' websites, you click the extension functionality, and there'd be a drop-down menu that shows you everything they're doing for SEO. That's completely free and with unlimited use. So oftentimes, if I want to get a gauge of if a client has any SEO on their website, I can quickly go to their website and take a look at that.
Okay, great. So that's some hopefully practical nuggets here for your website. And there's so much more, of course, we can talk website-wise, but again, we wanted to make sure at least you have some great tools to be thinking about for the future here for yourself, for your website. That then flows into tactics, right? Digital marketing tactics here. So as you can see in this slide, there's many tactics that you can be using, of course, for 2020 and beyond. We're not going to be digging into all of these tactics, given we have basically 45 minutes to talk, because again, we know that you have things to do in your day outside of just this webinar, but just know there's an extended version of our deck that we're still putting together as well, that eventually, if you're interested, you can be asking us about. But for the purpose of today's webinar, we really wanted to focus on 3 or 4 key tactics. Again, typically for a B2B audience, which we know most of you are. So we're going to spend time, instead of spending time on Facebook and Instagram here, and there's a lot that we can talk about with those platforms, we want to dig in a little bit deeper here to LinkedIn, right? So from a B2B perspective, most of the clients that we work with, that's where a lot of opportunity exists from a lead generation perspective, right? There's over 500 million users on LinkedIn at this point. It recently was purchased by Microsoft, and they are adding, or should I say, they are monetizing LinkedIn from a lead gen perspective. Every quarter, they're trying to do something else, which for marketers is really exciting, because you have such an opportunity to be targeting not just companies, but individuals and titles at companies, that doesn't exist with a lot of other channels. Okay, so I'm going to start basic, and then we're going to get a little bit more sophisticated. I'll go a little bit faster through the basic. But again, a lot of companies overlook the importance of their LinkedIn corporate profile, their company profile. We oftentimes are handed the baton from a web development firm where they're, a business owner has just spent tens of thousands of dollars on their website and it looks beautiful. And then I click on that LinkedIn chiclet, that small chiclet on their website, and it's not been done. There's been nothing that's done for TLC, tender loving care, for their LinkedIn company page. So you've got to make sure that even if you look at this page, right, you see that we have a Tribal Vision logo, we have a Tribal Vision masthead graphic in the background. Our profile is fully built out. We're posting onto our company profile. The basics. Just make sure you're checking that box. Don't just say, oh yeah, we've done it. Oftentimes we talk to business owners where they say, yeah, we've done it, but we find room for improvement to bring the credibility of the page to the next level.
Yeah, and just to talk a little bit more about posting, while on Facebook, for example, your company posts are only going to maybe reach 6% of your followers. On LinkedIn, it's much, much higher in the double digits because they want valuable content to be circulated by businesses. So that's why posting on LinkedIn is there's actual value there and conversations can be created from it.
Yeah. And don't forget also, now that your corporate profile is up to snuff and where it needs to be, don't forget about the employees, right? The teammates that you have at your company, the individual LinkedIn profiles are where they need to be. I mean, for some companies, engagements that we do together, we've brought in a photographer and lined up, 100 people in a room during an event, sometimes, a holiday party where they can get headshots so everything looks consistent, it looks professional, there's no fuzziness to it. All of those LinkedIn profiles are built out. There's recommendations on those profiles, especially of your senior team and of your sales team. The goal for your sales team, my perspective, is they should have a minimum of 1,000 connections, not even 500, but 1,000 good connections on LinkedIn. If they don't, you should definitely figure out a strategy and a game plan for them to get those 1,000. I mean, if we use me as the example, I have, I think now north of around 3,500. And those are good contacts, right? Business owners, VPs of marketing, VPs of sales. So when George's point about posting a piece of content to the corporate page takes place, and I then share that piece of content, I'm sharing it to 3,500 people that might be wanting to do business with Tribal Vision. And imagine if you have 25, 50 management type employees, maybe not factory workers if you're a manufacturer, but management level employees, all with at least 1,000 connections, and you have a process in place for them to share every piece of content. And there's a LinkedIn content calendar that's been put together for that. That is extremely powerful. Okay, so make sure that before you start going into the paid options, which we're going to go over on LinkedIn in a minute, make sure your house is in order, with your corporate profile and also with your teammates' profiles as well. And there's a process in place for them to be sharing.
Right, and just to hit on that last point, for every social media network, whether it be LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, their algorithms are saying if people are engaging with the content, let's show it more. So if you get 30 of your employees, for example, which Tribal Vision does, to share a post, LinkedIn is naturally going to distribute that further into the network. So that's an additional value there.
Yeah, one other, I think, nugget before we move on is make sure that there is, when we're talking content, don't just think it's white papers and case studies and a ton of 5-page pieces of content that a lot of people aren't even going to read. You've got to make sure that, number one, there's a nice graphic on top of that piece of content that's branded properly, consistent with your brand. And even better, let's try and have a video done, right? Because video is a piece of content where, again, to George's point, LinkedIn and other social media platforms are absolutely encouraging video to be taking place because they know that there's much more engagement with video than there is with just content, right? So using Tribal Vision as the example, next year our LinkedIn strategy, and you even saw it, I hope, we had Rob Meyer, my colleague here at Tribal Vision, even remind everyone about this event through a video. And so there's some cool tools that we can eventually talk about where for very little money, you can be doing that type of video, posting that on LinkedIn, and having video as part of your content strategy. Okay. Next, I want to talk a little bit about now some paid options here for you. So let's talk about Sales Navigator on LinkedIn. So far we've just talked about everything organically, and we now want to talk about, okay, what if you were to start paying a little bit on LinkedIn? So if you've heard of Sales Navigator, it's a way that you can now be in a much more targeted fashion, go after individuals on LinkedIn. It's $65 a month. It allows you to send 20 cold in-mails a month, right, where you can select who you want to be targeting, and then start reaching out to them through in-mail. You can also make private lead lists. You can see job activity. There's a lot more that you can be doing with using Sales Navigator, and it's not that expensive at $65 a month. So you should certainly be looking into that. So again, very quickly, using us as the example, Greg, who you saw earlier, right, where he was on our drift slide, right, where he's a business development person at Tribal Vision on the inside sales level. He is using Sales Navigator on a weekly basis to find 20 opportunities for us, and he's then sending in-mails out to those 20 opportunities with very personalized messages to those individuals at companies. So it's not just leveraging our own organic network, but it's also targeting companies that have never heard of us before.
Yeah, and so we're trying to be as efficient as possible here. So I'm going to talk through a couple different types of advertising formats you can do on LinkedIn. But just to quickly talk about how you build an audience on LinkedIn, it gives you capabilities in terms of looking at individuals by title or seniority. So you could literally look up CEOs or presidents of certain companies. You can target specific industries. You can target them by revenue bands, so you don't target too small of companies and waste money on them. Same with company size in terms of number of employees, geography, and field of study. We'll get into retargeting a bit later, but right now I want to talk about top funnel advertising methods. So we all should know what a LinkedIn in-mail is at this point, right? It's a message that comes into your LinkedIn inbox. You can send those for free to people within your network, but people outside of your network, people who aren't your connections, you have to pay to play. And so for roughly, we looked it up before, for roughly around 70 to 80 cents a send, you can get an in-mail, a sponsored in-mail in somebody's inbox. And you can create audiences of 10,000 people, 1,000 people, 100,000 people. It all depends on how much you're willing to spend. But you can send a message to them that says, hey, personalization is key to everything these days. None of us like being hit with something that looks like it hit 50 people's inboxes at once. So have somebody there ready to slightly tweak each of the in-mails so it fits their criteria for that prospect. But LinkedIn will naturally fill in the first name or the company name, for example. It'll automatically do that, so you don't have to do that manually. But these are messages that show up in people's inboxes on LinkedIn, and oftentimes if they accept to receive it, you'll engage in a conversation where you can send them a couple messages. Moving on to the next one, sponsored updates. These were the original advertisement for LinkedIn. It's what you see in your news feed. It could be static images, or recently they've allowed videos. And once again, this is a good place to advertise content or things like webinar events taking place. Typically, we don't recommend clients go straight to, hey, you want to have a conversation or a free consultation? You got to nurture people, right? You got to bring them down the marketing funnel, as we all know. So that's really what sponsored updates are images and videos in the news feed. Moving on to a very new tactic for LinkedIn, which is called lead generation forms. So once again, let's say we have a piece of content, a white paper, for example. That is something that we could pay LinkedIn to show an advertisement in their news feed that says, fill out this form and you'll get this free white paper, for example. And it provides you their first name, their email, their company. You can start building an email database with this tool where people will download different pieces of content. And then eventually, right, if we're talking about an example strategy that we've used for clients and at Tribal Vision, we create a white paper for manufacturers, for example, and we say, download this for free through LinkedIn. They download it, we get their email address. We then enter them into an email marketing sequence that says, hey, we saw you downloaded the white paper. We hope you're enjoying it. Let us know if you have any questions. Additionally, and we'll talk about retargeting more specifically, but you can put them in another LinkedIn audience specific to them. And you can say, essentially the deliverable is, or the messaging is, you downloaded the white paper. We sent you an email seeing if you had any questions. Now we're going to offer you to fill out a form for a free consultation. Building trust like that is what ultimately leads to conversions in businesses. That's just the way the industry is going. It's no longer you can use social network just to go straight to the getting business. You have to nurture them or build trust through things like white papers and other pieces of content.
Yeah, that's great, George. So only thing I'll add here is, again, just to tie it all together with the different ways you can be leveraging LinkedIn, right? I think it's pretty exciting where you have a piece of content. So we'll use Tribal Vision again, right? Our digital marketing playbook that we're talking about here. Well, once this webinar is completed as well, right, we could be, let's just say we're promoting that. We could be using now, the filter set that we've talked about, where we're targeting 5,000 companies in the Northeast that are fitting our filter set. And now we're able to send sponsored emails promoting that piece of content. We're then also hitting them with sponsored posts in their news feed. And now also we're able to do that through the use of lead forms, where instead of someone having to go to the Tribal Vision website in our landing page to fill out a form, it now can be done all right through LinkedIn, right? Which makes it so much easier for someone who wants to receive our piece of content to fill out some basic information and receive that. So, there's many ways now that you can start staying in front of very targeted niche audiences through LinkedIn, right? Both organically through your own efforts and teammates, but also now in 3 different ways, right? So probably one of the best compliments we get at Tribal Vision when we start working with someone is they say, "We see you everywhere," right? And hopefully in a good way, right? In a thought leadership type of way. It's how it is. Where they're like, yeah, whether we're on LinkedIn, whether we're on YouTube, whether we're, receiving an email, whether we're seeing you with thought leadership, through our feed, you guys, it seems like you guys are huge, and we're not huge, right? But we feel that way because we're leveraging these platforms in a multi-channel way, like very well. So there's no reason you can't be doing that for yourselves. Okay. So that's LinkedIn. We want to now talk about another tactic as well, which is account-based marketing. Some of the clients that are on here have certainly heard of it since they're working with us, but know that what account-based marketing is ultimately, right, is, again, we're talking B2B marketing here, right, where you're trying to sell to needles in a haystack oftentimes, very niche audiences, where you're working hand in hand with your salesperson or your sales team, right, to be identifying, again, we'll use Tribal Vision. Let's identify for 2020 the top 500 companies or 200 companies that we would love to work with next year. So we find those 200. We then go and leverage LinkedIn actually to then find the individuals at those companies that we want to be targeting. There are tools. So here's a nugget that's not in a deck right now for you, but there are tools why don't I skip to it, George, actually now? I think it's here. There are tools that you can be using to identify these accounts, like Clearbit and Hunter, which George will get into in a second, where you can find not only their LinkedIn addresses, of course, but their email addresses so that you can be building a very targeted custom list for you to be outreaching to. So do you want to talk to these tools, George, for a sec?
Yeah, exactly. Like we talked about, it starts off by picking what accounts or companies you want. Then you got to identify the people through LinkedIn, like Chris said, that you want to talk to. And then you can download these apps. And then once again, they're Chrome extensions or Outlook called Clearbit or Hunter, where you get, for example, 100 free email lookups a month. And what that means is some of them don't work with LinkedIn anymore. They've caught on. But for example, if you went to tribalvision.com and you had the Hunter Chrome extension and you clicked it in the top right of your browser, a drop-down menu would come down and you would be able to see a number of different people and their email addresses at that company. So if you're a sales rep on the call, or if you have a sales rep, get them to download this because it's immediately going to open up a new door of being able to find people's email addresses and reach out to them. So moving on to step 2 is profiling accounts. The biggest question is, what vertical are you looking for? For manufacturers, right? Is it OEMs or dealers and distributors? What kind of purchasing characteristics do you need to look at? So once you start picking the accounts, you're really moving on to how do you speak to these accounts?
Right, and I'll just add one important point here. Don't fly through this in terms of profiling the accounts. Oftentimes, what we found is it's not just the decision maker that you should be researching and finding at that company. Oftentimes it's influencers that are influencing the decision that you should be speaking to as well, or at least identifying and outreaching to. So we typically say, for each company that we have identified that we want to go after with digital and social channels next year, there's usually 3 or 4 individuals at each of those companies, right? If they're mid-sized companies that we want to be getting in front of. Okay. I went the other way here. One moment. And then from there, it's about creating content, right? So you've got to make sure that the content is also specific to that audience, right? So again, using Tribal Vision, if I'm targeting, let's pretend I'm targeting company X, where I'm reaching out to the CEO, but I'm also reaching out to the VP of marketing, and I'm also reaching out to the VP of sales. Well, my message is going to be very different to the CEO than it is to the VP of marketing, than it is to the VP of sales. So don't just go through the motions and say, okay, yep, I found my 3 or 4 connections per company, and now let's just create a generic piece of content or an email message. You should be really focused on getting a very specific message down and the right piece of content before you're starting your outreach efforts. Okay. Step 4, of course, is launching campaigns. So you would then say, okay, take a step back. I found my 200 companies. I found each of the 4 individuals at those 200 companies. So that's 800 individuals I'm going to be reaching out to. I've now been able to figure out my personas. So I have a different targeted message to each of those personas. And now I'm then actually going to start deploying outreach to them. This slide just talks to email. George is going to talk to more than just email in a moment. But just know there are now email platforms, automated, that's the key word, automated email platforms, where you can then start outreaching to these companies, even that have never opted in before, right? So little nugget alert here. There's a platform that we use called Apollo, and Apollo enables us then to send, between 6 and 8 emails to these influencers and decision makers at companies where it's automated. We found great success using that platform. There's many platforms that are out there. Apollo is one. What is that price? I think the price point, what's the price point, George, even before Apollo that we've used? That's like $100 a month. Persist IQ. So potentially for the smaller companies on this webinar, I would take a look at Persist IQ. I think that's, what is it, $100 a month or so?
I think the starting package is actually down to $80 monthly.
$80 a month.
Or $60 for an annual contract.
Okay, so if you sign an annual contract, it's around $60 a month. It'll enable you to send these drips, use their platform, see the reporting on all of these emails. It's fantastic. If you're a larger company that wants to be sending out more emails than what we're talking about with these 800 I mentioned, but you want to send out 800 a week, if you really want to scale this, you can take a look at Apollo. Apollo typically is between $10,000 and $12,000 a year. And as you can tell, it's much more expensive, but again, it can enable you to achieve scale with this type of outreach versus be very niche with just the 800 contacts that I mentioned. Okay. In addition, I want George here to just talk to a little bit more than just email, right? So we've talked about email for targeting for ABM, but there's many other channels that we can be using to create that awareness as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because, it's one thing to send somebody an email right off the bat and just say, hi, I'm Chris Yancey from Tribal Vision. I want to tell you about what it is we do. We all get emails like that every day. It's only getting more and more the case. And like we noted in that last slide, you can create a sequence. You can send them multiple emails. But once again, that's still not that effective. You want to make sure these people see you everywhere. Like Chris shared that anecdote earlier. That was what companies started saying to us after we implemented ABM and specifically remarketing. And just to give a quick definition of what remarketing is, I'm sure many of you, for example, have been looking for Christmas gifts or something like that. It's starting to be the season. You're starting and you're going and looking online, and let's say you want to get somebody a pair of shoes. You go on to wherever, Men's Warehouse, and you look at a pair of shoes and you leave, you don't make your purchase, but then you're on Facebook and what do you know? There's that pair of shoes again. And then you go on Instagram, there it is again. Or you're on Bloomberg and you see on the side the pair of shoes. They're following you around the internet. That's called remarketing. What happened was when you went to Men's Warehouse, there was what's called a pixel installed on the website and it caught your IP address. And it said, okay, I've got that. And it also caught thousands of other people's IP addresses. It's building an audience for you, a remarketing audience. And so that enables you to go into LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Google. There's a variety of networks, not to mention the million of other websites out there that have places for retargeting ads. It allows you to build an audience and retarget those people all throughout the internet. Once again, nurturing being the key word there, building trust. You can use strategic remarketing, like offering discounts later as they see more advertisements. There's a number of different strategies for it. Additionally, besides those that come to your website, if you've now generated that list of 800 or so contacts, you can actually upload them to LinkedIn, Facebook, or Google. You can upload them directly to the platform. And if, say, it's a lot of business email contacts, which for you B2B folks, it will be, LinkedIn is going to match profiles to each of those email addresses. It's called a custom audience. And then you can build an audience out of that you can target advertisements to as well. So once again, we have the email, but that's only scratching the surface. Once you have their information, once they're engaged, and if they've been to your website, you can retarget them. And if you have their email addresses in a list, you can upload it to LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever, and you can send them ads that way. Once again, proving the concept of being everywhere.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part here, right? Is that, again, you don't want to just take a singular approach with your marketing to say, I'm just going to do LinkedIn, or I'm just going to do Facebook, or I'm just going to do email, right? I mean, really the magic has happened for our clients and also for Tribal Vision with this more multi-channel approach. I know we're getting short on time here, so we're going to have to fly a little bit through the last few slides, but I at least did want to touch on something that's pretty exciting that maybe some of you have heard of, some of you haven't. It's called Geo Fencing. With Geo Fencing, in a nutshell, what it is, it's just what it sounds like. You can put a geographic fence around a certain area. And now, and what you can then do in that fence, that fenced off area, is you can actually serve ads to individuals on their phones, right, or on their devices in that fence. So when you think about that, right, it opens up a land of opportunity with putting a fence around physical locations, trade shows, either that you go to or that you're not going to, but you know that there's a huge audience there that's your target audience. And also at prospective locations, right? So just know that this is super exciting.
Yeah, and just to give, it's a pretty abstract concept. It's brand new, but just to give a couple examples of each of these. For a physical location, for example, I heard a great anecdote where a company, a record label, was trying to republish an Elvis album, a greatest hits, and they were struggling. They were saying, how do we target Elvis fans? Of course, you can go on Facebook and you can enter that parameter, but they were trying to get a bit more complicated with it. So what they did was they put a geofence around Graceland, which is the house of Elvis in Tennessee, and anyone who went there was served an ad about the greatest hits album. So it was a very sort of interesting and cool way in which they used geofencing to find new audiences. Additionally, for trade show and events, something we were contemplating when we attended East Tech this year, we had a booth up at East Tech, and we were doing free website audits, we were doing free marketing audits. We thought about doing a geofence around that, where anybody who was in a mile radius of our booth would see an ad. And just to talk about where these show up, they show up on apps and they show up on websites. They would see an ad for Tribal Vision's free consultations.
Right. So if you're wondering how it works, right, you just go into that fenced off area that we've fenced off. And if you're on the Weather Channel app, then there's an ad that's served to you once that app is open, right? You've seen some paid advertising that can happen through that app, the New York Times. I mean, there's countless apps on your phone where this can be served through. So it's super cool, right? Right now, what we're doing for some of our clients is usually larger clients where they are wanting to put a fence, right? We have one, for example, that is a university that has a publishing arm, and there's a lot of great information, right? Knowledge base that they have that they want to share with executives at the Googles and Apples and Amazons of the world. Well, we can help actually, right, in which we have, right, put a fence around certain companies in their geographic, not just zip codes. What about their actual company headquarters? What about the conference room within those headquarters where it's just C-suite executives? It is getting to the level of refinement where you can even just be selecting rooms within companies, not just, again, like large footprints. So imagine being able to then appear, on their phone in those very specific locations. And you can also then track conversions from that as well. So once that happens, you can then see if they are then coming back to your website from that ad, you can then see, with reporting what's working and what's not, and continue to refine. So it's just sort of the beginning frontier here with where marketing is going, but it is super exciting. So, here's the last slide here, but just know here's a Geofence targeting example, of course, right? So we're putting that fence around a certain area of a university, and we're building awareness, driving website conversions through that fence. So think about it for your own business. We are certainly for Tribal Vision, right? You can even be thinking about it as if there's competition that's down the road, for example, that you want to be, whoever's walking into that competitor's building, you want to actually be appearing to with thought leadership type of ads, you could actually start thinking about that. So, George, you have anything to add, or?
No, I mean, there's a number of different ways you could do it. It really requires some creativity, but just like we talked about, you could target, if you have a retail store, at a mall, that's a great Geo Fencing example. Like Chris mentioned, competitors, trade show or events, even from an ABM approach, right? Going back to that, if you can find the geographic headquarters of each of your accounts you want, put a geofence around that. Make sure they see those ads during their lunch break when they're scrolling through their phone. So a number of different ways you can use this really exciting and cool new tactic.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, we're right at 1:59, so the webinar has been completed.